Okay, good morning. Welcome to Read Aloud. Today is Monday, March 30th, 2020. Readers, we are going to be readers of nonfiction history, and we'll be paying attention to main ideas, synthesizing information, and analyzing and critiquing events, people, and interpretations of history. I'm very excited because this means that we're off doing new units of study. So in Reading Workshop, we're going to be doing reading in the content area, which is basically where we read a lot of social studies type of articles and watch videos. And in Writing Workshop, we're going to use what we've read to write about it in a research report. So I'm excited for these two new units, Reading Workshop, reading in the content area, and Writing Workshop, the lens of history, writing research reports. All right, let's get started with our read aloud. So I should mention that the read aloud today was kind of inspired by this video that we watched last week on Brain Pop. It was like an overview of Westward Expansion, and that is where we're going to be getting a lot of the content reading from, is this Westward Expansion. So one part of the video talked about the pioneers' arrival in the West and how it posed a serious threat to the Indians' way of life. So for decades, the government had moved the Indians off their native land so that white settlers could live there. So when I saw that video, it kind of got me thinking like, I think that's the area I kind of want to know more in, and I think that's the area that I am going to be working on and showing you a lot of information on. So it definitely inspired the read aloud for this morning, which is forced removal. Forced removal, this is a article that's available to you, but I want to share it with you, and I'm going to do it as a read aloud. So the title is Forced Removal. That has a lot of people kind of dressed in colorful garments. It makes me kind of think that they might be Native Americans. I see a man with like a feathered headdress here. Some of them are on horses. Some of them are walking. I see like there's a baby here. I also see like a man with a gun that tells me maybe he's some kind of a soldier. It looks like there's a similarly dressed guy over here and over here. So down here, there's a caption. It says, "Forced from their homes above, the Cherokee Indians suffered on the Trail of Tears," which took its name from the Cherokee phrase, Nuna Dal Tuni, meaning the trail where they cried. So I'm connecting the title and this caption here with this picture, and I'm thinking this must be a picture that somebody has done, maybe representing this Trail of Tears, this Indian suffering that they're talking about. Let's read on. For many years, the West represented a chance for a wonderful new life. But for Americans' native people, the push westward resulted in quite the opposite experience. The story of the Cherokee Indians, the single largest Native American group in the Southeast, is just one example of the mistreatment of Indians during this time. Before the arrival of the first Europeans, Cherokee country included most of present-day Kentucky and Tennessee, as well as parts of western Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and northern Georgia and Alabama. I know from my own knowledge that that is part of the Southeast. All of those states are located in the southeastern half of the country. By the 1800s, settlers had taken most of this land. The Cherokees were left with only a small section of northwestern Georgia. When gold was discovered there in 1828, the U.S. government wanted this land too. Under a law passed by Congress called the Indian Removal Act of 1830, President Andrew Jackson ordered the Cherokees to leave. Wow, that doesn't sound very fair. So I have a main idea here. I'm thinking that these Cherokee people were pushed out. White settlers took the land, and it says President Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act of 1830. You know what? I actually might want to think also about the fact that they were pushed out because gold was found there. Doesn't sound very fair. All right, moving on. This next paragraph. Centuries of contact with white settlers already had decimated many native populations. Tens of thousands of Indians had died after exposure to diseases against which they had no immunity. In addition, as the number of settlers had increased in the 1700s, American Indian tribes had been pushed from their lands east of the Mississippi River. Now the Indian Removal Act decreed that all Native people be resettled on land west of the river, which was seen as the American desert. Wow, tough. So right here, I want to say a main idea from this paragraph here is that disease killed Native Americans because they had no immunity. I'm kind of making a connection between this disease killing the people with no immunity to something that's happening with us right now. As you know, coronavirus is something that is really making a lot of people sick and even killing some people, and it's because people don't have any immunity to it. They've never had exposure to this disease before. So that kind of makes me think that that's a lot like what people in these Native Americans were going through in the 17 and 1800s. But also at the end of this paragraph, I want to definitely mention that it says that these people were forced into what they considered the desert, right? That west of the Mississippi River. All right. Some concept vocabulary from this page that I definitely want to make sure that you're jotting. Concept vocabulary. Cherokee, right? That's the name of the nation of Native Americans. The Indian Removal Act of 1830. Definitely want to jot that down. That was the law that was passed that said they had to move. Settlers. In this instance, I think settlers means white settlers. Those people who maybe were originally in those colonies. This in particular probably refers to white settlers. And then, of course, Trail of Tears. That's another concept vocabulary. That is the journey that these people took to go west of the Mississippi River because they were forced. All right, let's move on to the second page. By May 1838, Army troops began rounding up the Cherokees, removing them from their homes, and imprisoning them in stockaded forts. In the fall, the Indians began a forced walk of almost 1,200 miles from Georgia to Oklahoma. The sick, the young, and the elderly rode in wagons. You know what? Actually, I want to look over here at some of this maps here, because I think that might connect to these ideas. So over here I see it says territorial limits, Cherokee Nation of Indians, and it says in the caption, the Cherokees' homeland once included a large area of today's southeastern United States above. Most Cherokee villages were in the southern Appalachian Mountains. So this kind of looks over at the territory of this map. I think it says, it's hard to see, but I think it's 1834. And then over here, this other map, it says, after the Indian Removal Act, the Cherokee Indians were relocated to the reservation in Oklahoma. So this is where they used to live, this area, and now here, this is where they were forced to live. It looks like there's a lot more area here than in this other map here. Looks like a lot of them were forced to go into a smaller area. And as we read the previous page, they considered this area west of the Mississippi to be like a desert. Let's read on. The sick, the young, and the elderly rode in wagons, while the others trudged on foot through difficult weather. At night, exhausted, they slept on the frozen ground, covered only by thin blankets. Hunger, exposure, and disease took their toll. At each stopping point, at least 15 shallow graves were dug in the frozen earth. This terrible forced migration became known as the Trail of Tears. 4,000 Cherokees, about 1/4 of the population, died as a result. So my main idea is that the Trail of Tears was brutal. The Army put the Cherokee in prison. They forced the Cherokee to walk from Georgia to Oklahoma in bad weather. And a lot of people died from hunger, exposure. That's like when your body gets too cold, and disease. 1/4 of the Cherokee population died. So I definitely want to jot that down. All right, let's read on. The Trail of Tears would not be the last time that broken promises and treaties resulted in the U.S. government pushing a Native American group from its lands. By the 1800s, even those Indians who lived west of the Mississippi came into conflict with the growing presence of permanent settlers. In many parts of the West, traditional Indian hunting and farming lands were taken. Most of the bison that the Indians had relied on for food, meat, tools, bones, and shelter and clothing, hides, were killed. Wow. So it seems like in this next paragraph that the U.S. continued their brutality. So the U.S. government says it broke treaties, and that by the late 1800s, the Native Americans west of the Mississippi River were also pushed out. And then the bison, which was a major resource, were all killed. This seems like a really, really tough time for Native American peoples living in this part of the world and during this time period. Let's read on to the next paragraph. Some, such as the Sioux and the Apaches, fought back and resisted efforts by the U.S. government to keep them on reservations, but they ultimately were no match for the U.S. Army. Unable to save their land or their way of life through either peaceful or violent methods, most Native Americans found themselves forced to live on reservations by the end of the 1800s. Wow. So it seems like the Native Americans were unable to save their way of living, like how they were living. It's interesting to know that some groups, like the Sioux and the Apache, fought, but the U.S. Army defeated them, and that most of these Native Americans were forced to live on reservations. That's a lot going on here. Let's make sure to jot down some content vocabulary. So, content vocabulary we want to make sure that we are keeping track of. We have Cherokee and Indian Removal Act of 1830, settlers, Trail of Tears. I thought there was a really good definition over here, and it says, this terrible forced migration known as the Trail of Tears. So maybe we could call that the terrible forced migration. I might want to jot that down. And then, of course, the Sioux and the Apache. These are other Native American nations that were also living in the western United States. Those are the ones that fought back. And then these reservations. I'd be interested to know a little bit more about there, because this article doesn't really go into detail about them. But they were places, it seems like, that Native Americans were forced to live on. So take a moment to jot down the concept vocabulary and these main ideas. And if you have to go back and rewatch some of this, go ahead and do that work. All right. See you soon. Bye.